There are a lot of graphic trends that come and go. The good ones tend to stick around, and one such style that has a nice, clean aesthetic is what I call fat line logos. That is, using one continuous weight of stroke on all the line work in a logo motif. Let me show you how to approach this type of logo design. So we're going to create a graphic mark. It'll end up being what I call an encapsulated logo, a badge, if you will. And this one is going to be based off of the theme of welding. So that's what you see in front of you is the elements that are going to be used in this motif. So I have an anvil, I have a hammer, and I have a pair of pliers or wrenches. I'm not even sure what they call those for doing smithery with fire and molten steel and all that, but it's what you grab the piece with and then you hammer it on top of the anvil. But these are all the elements we're going to use in this design, and this is exactly how I approach it. I create outline shapes like this. I'm not worried about fills. I'm not worried about the thickness of the strokes at this point. It's just composing the overall shape and form of the pieces I'm going to use. Now on this design, if I select these images, I know I want the outline to be kind of this gray color. So we're going to go ahead and color that gray. And I'm also going to bring up stroke here because we're going to want to go ahead and work on this. Let's zoom in so we can see this a little better. And I'm going to crank this up. I want this to be pretty fat. So we'll try 8. No, I think I'll go 9. I think that looks good. Now, when you're working on this, the key to this style is obviously the fat line nature of the graphics. But what you're going to have to do is when I create the initial shape, these proportions seem to work well, but when I apply the fat nature, a 9-point stroke on this art, you can see that you just have this sliver of area showing through on the base. So this is where you'll want to go through as you're building when you notice this area, and you'll either have to rebuild some of this content or in this case, just nudge it down to make adjustments. So we'll nudge this down. Let's see, 1. I think that looks good right there. So this is what I do when I'm building this. I think that looks far better than what we previously had, and it feels nice and beefy, kind of going with the nature of this. We'll go ahead and select this. And actually, I should point out, once you have this built like this, one thing that I do to make working in this style easier at this point is I'll put a white fill in the middle of these like this. And then I'll also bring up my graphic styles right here. And I'm going to just drag this into my graphic styles palette, because what that allows me to do now is I can just select these shapes and apply this style. Select these shapes and apply this style. So you can see how fast it goes in regards to doing that. Now, when I did that, the hammer, once again, I think the inner space of the handle itself is too thin. I want there to be more white space shown. So I'm just going to select the areas on this side. And let's see, we'll do it evenly on both sides. We'll try a couple on each. And yeah, I think that looks better. And then on this one, because all of these kind of merge down because of the thickness of the stroke, you get this big gray area at the bottom. I don't like that. So I just want to select this and just bump it out like that, just so you get more white showing. And I'm using the nudge keys by using the direct selection tool, selecting the anchor point by dragging it over it, and then just nudging it. In this case, I nudged it 5 points to the left and 5 points to the right. And I think that looks good. So that's all I'm going to do for my entire design motif, which is this. And once again, if I select all of this and apply my path, you can see how quickly a really cool composition can come about working that way. Once again, if I go to keyline view, all of these are just simple shapes. And right now they're sitting on top of one another. So when I deliver final art, we'll want to convert those to outlines. I'm going to show you that shortly. But this is how you can compose the general look and feel. Now, as I was progressing this forward, here's some type I added to it. I also worked in where it's the same outside element. All I did is I selected this banner, I selected the shield, the elements in the crown, the tools, on each side, and then I combined it into one shape. And then once I had that, I went to Object, Path, Offset Path, and that's how I created this offset shape that I have selected here. With that offset shape selected, I just made a copy of it, slid it down, and filled it with the same gray color. And you can see how it adds a nice dimension to the overall motif going on here. Now, this design is done in terms of its visual appearance, but it's not done in terms of creating the final art that I would want to provide to a client. And I think that's important to cover when we're talking about this style, because you would not want to give a client this artwork with strokes in place. The whole reason for that is because if you go to Illustrator and you go to Preferences and you go to General, there's a feature called Scale, Strokes, and Effects right here. And what happens is by default, that is not checked. So if you send this file to a client and they happen to not have that checked and they scale this up or down, the size of the stroke is going to change and it's going to ruin the aesthetic of your design. So that's the importance of building this out and converting the paths. So I just want to show you how I do that. So I'm just going to select this shape in terms of this anvil right here. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and go Object, Path, Outline Stroke like this. And then I can select. Actually, before we do that, right now we have the white fill. Let's get rid of that by making it empty. So it's just the stroke now. I'll select all of them, go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and now I'm just going to go to Pathfinder and I'm going to unite them all together. And you can see that it creates a final design that's just made up of one shape that has a compound path in it. We're going to select all these anchor points that it adds because it's fusing together multiple shapes. And we'll just select those, and then I'll go up at the top and I'll remove them. So once again, I like to do that kind of cleanup as I'm working, as I'm creating. That way I don't miss something going along. So this is the final art. And this could be colored anything, but in this case, we're keeping it gray. And if I go to Keyline View, this is now a shape. This is still paths. So we have to continue to do the other ones. Now, sometimes the process can get a little messy. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill it with nothing. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to outline these top ones. So we'll go Outline Stroke. I'm going to unite them as one shape like that with the Pathfinder. We're going to color this something different just so you can see what's going on now. And you can see that this shape is showing through the other one. So when I expand this path by Outline Stroke, what I want to do now is I just want to take another shape, and this is what I call a throwaway shape, and we're creating it for no other reason than to edit another shape. So I'll select these both. I'll shear off the part we don't need, just so nothing's peeking out. Then I can select both of these, fuse these together, and now it's one coherent shape. So now if we go to Keyline View, we have nothing but shapes, fills, no strokes. That's what you want. That's how you want to set up your final art on everything. And it just takes time to build it this way, but I always keep a copy of my outline just in case I want to go back and reuse it for something or modify something. I can go back to the source artwork and do so. Now, when it's all said and done on this design, this is what the final looked like. You can see on the left, it's purple, and on the right, almost like an eggplant color. And this was when I was experimenting with color. Now, if I zoom in on this, I also added a nice kind of subtle gray, which I think looks really good, but eggplant isn't cutting it. So I'm going to change this to more of a color that represents forging, which forging is like glowing hot metal. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. And I kind of like this orange color better. So initially it started off as gray. I thought I'd keep it with gray, thinking metal and fabrication. But then after I got to this point and started playing with color, I think the orange one looks really great. Now, this specific aesthetic of design works great on a colored background because it's so simplified. So you can pull off something like this, which looks pretty cool with a fat line logo. So some have referenced to this style of logo design as hipster logos, and that's all well and good. That said, I think it's very effective and a legitimate style that can apply to a wide range of clients. And in my opinion, that makes it a valuable creative option to consider.